Hi, I'm Noam Wasserman, Dean of the SciSim School of Business at Yeshiva University. I was a longtime professor at Harvard Business School, an entrepreneur, and a venture capitalist. I wrote the bestseller, The Founder's Dilemmas.
And I'm Charlie Harary. I've been working with companies for over 10 years. And that book, The Founder's Dilemmas, and the challenges faced by the 10,000 founders in it is the basis of this podcast. We are delving into the issues faced by startups to help you avoid the pitfalls that claim so many good companies.
Let's get started.
Welcome to Founders Dilemmas podcast. We are delving in. This is part 2 of our series of 3. We're delving into the Angels Bootcamp panel that we had a couple weeks ago, and sort of identifying some of the great advice that we heard and going through it. So, Dean, let's pick up where we left off. You had made a couple of great comments last time. I took some notes, and what's on top of your mind, and let's jump right back in.
No, absolutely. And as we mentioned last time, we're going to be really the core of the content that we're tapping is the panel that you had done at our Angel Investor Bootcamp with 3 very experienced people in this domain, one founder turned investor, and one investor. One thing I'd love to highlight for people, in addition to the cross-cutting issues that I teed up last time around the human side of founding, the human side of investing, is people to just watch for, is it good for an investor to have a founding background? Charlie, last time I talked a little bit about the person who's been there and done that versus the one who is on the sidelines, the one watching versus the one doing. Finding also, there are some pros to an investor having had a founding background, and there's some cons from a human perspective to that person having been there, done that. Are they going to get too involved? Yeah. Are they going to overrule the founder? That's not the way I did it. And so there's some underappreciated things in terms of the pros and the cons of the investor having had a founding background or not. But that's one of the ones, in addition to the things that we started off last time with, to take a look at that. Within the segment of the panel that we're going to be listening to now, let me highlight what are the major 4 domains, and then afterwards we'll just have some of the comments of the notes that we made on it. The first, and this segment is going to focus on decision-making as an investor. So first is going to be about rational versus emotional decision-making, the head versus heart from Steve Jobs that we had talked about last time, and also our first ever of the episodes that we did, period, in season 1. Second is, in terms of decision-making, developing pattern recognition, how to go from the first deal that you're seeing as an investor where it's all over the place and you don't really have a feel for the overall gestalt, you don't really have the pattern recognition they have to develop over time. Third, are there ways to make that decision-making as an investor a little bit more rational? And then finally, doing due diligence on the founders. How do the people on our panel do it? How did the founder who was being due diligenced experience it? And so a variety of the things in terms of, as an investor, decision-making, those are what the things are that we're going to be listening to for the next about 13 minutes or so. And then we'll have some comments and thoughts about it.
Maybe you guys can help me figure out or discuss the difference between a rational and an emotional decision, right? It's hard to sort of balance. So much of this game is taking place between your ears. It's the psychology of wanting to do something, like you said earlier, Moshe, the FOMO of it, the seeing yourself in the founder. And so as a result, many times the emotions will drive a decision because you get excited about an opportunity, and then it overwhelms the rational way of seeing the world. So can you talk us through a little bit about that dichotomy, about emotions versus the rational perspective? How do you balance it? How do you manage it? Is there something that you do to ensure that decisions that you're making are not being done in a way that overwhelms your rational mind?
So from an investor's perspective, I would say reference checks. For example, if I'm investing in a company and the founders, I'm connected with a few people, I would just do a reference check, just ask their friends, hey, how is it to work with this guy or girl or so forth, and have they had success before and so forth. And then also another thing too is, how transparent is the founders in terms of them letting you know when things are going bad or so forth. Because you meet a lot of people that just says the right things and they sugarcoat a lot of things, and you might think it's going well, but in reality it's not. Even like when, let's say you get a funding announcement on TechCrunch, someone raised $10 million. that 10 million probably is not in their bank. Probably half of it was convertible notes that they raised like a few years ago that got converted in. And so they probably only have 5 million in the bank. So it's a lot of these sugar-coated things that's happening that you just gotta like see right through it.
So I think it's like, I'm doing also the public market, so you only learn by doing it. You're only gonna learn not to do FOMO when you're gonna get a bad investment from that. So you know the next one to be more careful. Like in the stock market, you need to get out the emotion of that. Just, you're gonna get some losses, you're gonna be more careful. The same thing here. You can hear and listen, but when it comes, you see a good deal and everyone is like talking about it, you see the big eyes, so next time, and if it doesn't work out, next time you be more careful. And next time more careful, more careful.
So it's tough, because I mentioned beforehand, so much of the decisions are going to be, judgment calls or gut feels, right? I mean, unlike the public market where you could look at like years of historical data, to the extent that that predicts future data, you often have, very little track record or no track record, depending on how early you're getting in. The founder may have one, but it's one startup, right? I mean, that's one data point. So you're going a lot on your gut. So, it's very difficult sometimes. Am I going with my gut as reflective of my accumulated experience and a rationed decision that's just happening subconsciously, or am I getting emotional about it? So separating those two is really, really hard. But that doesn't really answer the question, because the question is, how do you prevent that? So here's a couple of things that I've done. Number one, I look for disproving information. Right? It's very easy when you start to fall in love with a deal to see everything that confirms it. Oh, that supports it, that supports it. You got to go out there and almost say like, what data might there be out there that would make me not want to do it? And then go look for that data and look hard. And then when you can't find that data, you feel a little more comfortable that you're not just falling into a confirmation trap. The other thing, and related to it, and I do this with startups a lot, is I say, okay, let's pretend it's 4 years from now or 3 years from now, and it failed. Why did it fail? It's called a pre-mortem, right? Let's pretend that it's dead, and let's think of all the ways that could have gotten here. And suddenly that surfaces a lot of risks that maybe you didn't think of. And then you use that to go and try to test, is there any data that those scenarios might happen or not? It helps a little bit. It helps like a little bit of a reality check. Helps you, don't just do something. Stand there a little while first.
Hey guys, so we discussed a little bit about pattern recognition in founders and co-founders. How many deals did it take for you to do before you recognized your own pattern recognition yourself in terms of personal biases that you had in your investments? Because I hear you guys talking very respectfully about like getting a little bit lucky here or this and that, and sort of developing a philosophy about how you want to invest and there being a right way or a less right way. But how long did it take before you sort of developed your own mojo about it?
That's a very nice way to say it. How long did it take me to realize I was full of crap and to actually start learning? I was definitely, I got 3 teenage daughters. I've been called worse. It's tough, right? At first, you think you're a genius, and like everything's going well until they have to raise their next round, and suddenly things aren't going so well. It was definitely a couple of years. I mean, there's a joke in the industry. What does it take to train a VC? And the answer is $50 million in 10 years, right? It didn't take me quite that long or that much money, but I don't know about. I'd done a couple of angel deals before I joined DreamIt. It was for a couple of years, and then DreamIt I saw a couple of hundred startups in the first few months. It was probably about 2 years into that kind of volume before I kind of felt comfortable with what I didn't know, and it took a while.
I think like startup is an unknown territory, so you can't really measure that, but you get better by doing it. So it depends how much time, effort you're putting in. It's not easy, it's hard, but it's worthwhile. I think it's a good allocation to have in your portfolio to invest some good startups. But you need to know what you do. And don't get excited. A friend is working with some now, especially AI or crypto. You gotta know what you do. If you don't know, just talk to some experienced people to get some advice.
Yeah, and don't feel like you have to do it alone. Right? If you have someone who's been doing it for many years, work with them. There's good angel groups you can join. There's not some good angel groups you can join. But, it's great. Like, you'll hear the questions other people ask, like, oh, I really should have thought about that question. And if you're smarter than me, you'll keep quiet and no one will know that you didn't know that.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot today about emotional decision-making, rational decision-making, and in this room, at least so far today, people talk about pattern recognition as like rational and gut decisions as irrational, which like, I don't know how much sense that makes necessarily, but that's the language we've been using here. And you answered some questions around how to de-risk downside using some like rational tools, reference checks, looking for disproving information, seeing like if the founders remind you of a more naive self. What are things you look for in terms of like upside and increasing opportunities, like in order to remove your own biases there? Or do you just stay away? You're like, too risky, doesn't matter, I can stay out.
Well, no, I mean, so my mental image of a startup is a chain. If any link is broken, the chain's useless. So that's why I say sometimes I'll get a deck and I'll know like, oh, they're pitching architects. There's only 200,000 architects in the country. Market size probably too small. I go straight to the market slide and the revenue model, right? Because market size is always bottoms up. Oh, if you're charging X dollars per year per architect and there's this many architects, is it big enough? And if the answer is no, or I don't believe you can get that money, like I'm done. I don't need to spend any time on it. But if that part checks out, and the question is, what's the right size company? Because so many of my startups will fail, I need to have a reasonable belief that any one of them could become a unicorn, even though I know realistically, very, very few will. So usually the rule of thumb people have is like, it's got to be $1 billion total addressable market. When you factor in like nobody gets all of the market, there's going to be multiple rounds of investment going into it. That's the rule of thumb. I don't know where it comes from, but it seems to work. If it's super capital intensive, I want it bigger. If the startup can make a convincing claim that they're not going to need more than a round or two, so I'll get less dilution, maybe I'll go a little lower, but that's my rule of thumb.
I would say, like, I make a comment, no one knows anything. So in the public and private, you got to do what you got to do. You got to check the founder should be good, the market should make sense, and all the basically the checks. So you got to have like a system with how you work. It's all up to God,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes with the companies and the pitch decks, it might be the best pitch deck you probably have ever seen, and the founders might be executing the idea, but sometimes the idea doesn't work, and you got to pivot. So can the founders actually pivot? And if they can, then that's it. But if they can, then there's another chance that they can actually be big. So yeah.
It's a lot also about timing. You can have the right idea too early or too late,
I was just going to say thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. And I wanted to know, when you say your advice is to take your time, roughly, when you're first meeting a founder, how long are you spending with them, and roughly how long would you say is, taking your time? Are you just sort of feeling it out, or is this like months, or?
It depends on the company. I could do a decision a week, but I need to feel comfortable. If I'm not going to do it as long as I feel comfortable. Usually if it takes too long, I'm out. But
Okay.
If it takes you too long to get comfortable, that's sometimes your gut telling you that there's something there.
you need to push yourself to get excited.
A little bit. Like if you really want it, it's like, are you hungry? Why is the food still on the table? So to answer your question, how long do you take? So when you're an angel investor, your time is different than when you're in a VC. So as a VC, you have a certain target for how many investments you want to make over the course of a year. And you make such a small percentage of them that when you actually do the math, you're seeing a lot of startups. Like to say, and you're going to think I'm exaggerating, to say that over the course of 2 or 3 years, I saw 2,000 startups. Like I actually saw 4. But it's nuts just how many you have to see. The vast majority of them you don't even meet with. Right? You look at the deck, You spend less than 5 minutes on it. You get to the point where you're like, oh, I've seen this movie before. It didn't end well for Mr. Lincoln. So you just kind of move on. But when you do meet, when you get something that looks good and you meet, I usually schedule a half hour or an hour for the first meeting. And if I've gone over their deck and I got my questions ready to go, that's usually enough for me to determine whether or not I want to spend more time on it or not.
So I actually have two examples I'm thinking now. I met Kumesh 8 years ago, pitching an event. And we met the following week and we didn't come to agreement. A year later, now it's going to be 7 years, I got an email, this is what we accomplished for the year. I was really impressed. We did a deal right away after a year. So with Andrew, actually, a different story. A company when we invested together, I made a decision on the spot and I was the first investor. So it's every deal, it could be different. You can always come back. It depends if they really accomplish things,
Okay, so Charlie, looking at some of the things that struck me and the insights that we were getting from this segment of the panel. Very interesting comments that Kumesh had, our founder on the panel, about vapor funding, about how he's seen, we talk about vaporware that founders are selling a lot of times in their startup, unfortunately, like they don't quite have it yet. They have to fake it till they make it, the perspective that they take on it. And he was applying that also to funding. Talked about, let's say you get a funding announcement on TechCrunch, they brag that they've raised 10 million. As it turns out, it's probably not in the bank. It probably wasn't just raised now. It's where they're taking all sorts of ways that they want to be able to look like they've succeeded at this very difficult task of fundraising. And so that's another one at the nexus of the founder and investors that I found intriguing.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point that he's making, which is, I've heard this term used before. I don't know if you've ever heard it before, called pegging, where, like the way you climb up a wall, like those rock climbing walls, where what you're really trying to do is you can't get to the top of the wall, but you find any peg, any rock you could hold on to, and then that'll lift you here and that'll lift you there, right? So when you're building a startup, what you're really trying to do is get someone to say you did a good job. The famous story is, Steve Schwartzman, I remember which exact bank it was, had his first investment from some very reputable insurance company, and as a result, it flowed. The other investors you're dealing with would say, sure, no problem. So trying to get some measure of acceptance in the marketplace through someone else put your money in first. And so it's that world of playing those games. And it's a very interesting world where you cross between the world of dishonesty or just gamesmanship and knowing how to share the confidence of others through their money and what that's going to do to get you new money. But yeah, seeing through that is a critical eye for a VC. I think not that I do anything that there's well enough, but I've over my life started to see that in resumes because of the world that I live in, where you start to see the vaporizing of a resume when someone says, worked on $4 billion transaction. You're like, really? You were an intern? Like, what did you do on the 4 billion? Like, and it ended up being that they just were there in the room and they got the guy a cup of. So being able, and actually in some of the work in consulting, I would, there's a period of time where I was consulting partners in law firms to help them see through it because they were hiring these people and they weren't able to do the work and they didn't realize that they just weren't seeing through the vapor of the resume. So that's a critical skill in everything in life.
And the pattern recognition that you build over time, you built it by resume after resume and the investing and founder things that you've done that you've been able to accumulate over time, being able to see through that. But also, I would put the onus on the founders also. Ethical entrepreneurship should not be an oxymoron. It is critical for them to be in sync. When we were developing our MBA program, 2 of the 3 pillars, essentially, of it are integrity and entrepreneurship because they are so very intertwined. With what you have to be able to do both as a founder. This is the kind of thing, doing due diligence in whatever direction. If you are a hire joining a startup, you should be evaluating these things. If you're an investor, putting money into the startup. All of these ways in which it all has to come together, but how do you see through it is one of the key things that they were highlighting there. Yeah. Another one of the golden things, this is from Andrew when he's talking about avoiding the confirmation trap and the disconfirming evidence, which is one of the key recurring themes that we have across these. He brought up the best practices, if you will, around doing a postmortem, but applying it to the pre-mortem. Usually you do it after something as finished, and then what are the lessons that we learned? How can we front load that and do it before we're making the investment? And what this brought to mind is there was one of the few academic research papers that we brought up during our podcast very early on, when we were talking about the findings about the percentage of failures that were due to people issues. The second of the papers, the one that was done in 2004 by Kaplan and Stromberg, what they looked at to see what were the reasons for failure were the pre-investment memos that venture capitalists had done, anticipating what are the risks here, what are the things that could go wrong, and then being able to tell from that for them, 61% of the reasons for failure, anticipated failure, were the people issues. And so here, this is one example, and we'll see some other ones, about taking a best practice from venture capitalists and bringing it into your own investing. When you're doing your own money, there's some things that not having to be constrained by being a VC, one of the other things that's going to be coming up soon, there's some benefits to it, but there's also some of the things that VCs do that you should import into your own investing. Doing pre-mortems is one of those things. Being able to have other ways in which you have others pushing and pulling on you. We had talked about within founding teams, the Azer Kenegdo, the pushback that is the help, being able to have that dynamic within the founders. And when Andrew was talking about being part of an angel group, not just being a solo practitioner as an investor, not just doing the own decision-making on your own, but having others, angels, who are going to be able to push back on you and be the Azer Kenegdo, learning from the questions they're asking and other things that he was talking about. And so that was the second of the best practices from VC that I would suggest that people take very seriously what they're doing, their own investing and being able to have the benefits of angel, but also not have the detriments of it, and being able to import some VC best practices to be able to get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I think that the overall theme here for those that are trying to get into this space, and I can tell you from my own personal experience that I failed in this area more than once and more than twice, is the slowing down of the excitement to be part of something that has the feeling of success, right? The ability, if you want to be in this game for a long time, you have to start to develop your analyses of how you see things. And it won't happen if you're going too quick and if you don't spend the time on the pre-mortems and the post-mortems and the thinking and where did I go wrong and why am I making this investment for, and getting underneath your thinking, right? Most people take somebody else at their word. Most people want to be futuristic. Most people are positive, right? There are sort of more pessimists, but most people are optimists. And so chances are, if you're in VC, you're probably on the optimist side. You want that person to be right. You want to believe what they're saying. You see the way they see the projections coming in and all that success coming your way. To actively turn that down, to put an analysis, to do pre-mortems, to do thinking, to write the memos, to read the memos. This is the game change. This is where you go from playing, gambling with a little bit of headspace to actually being in the game of VC, when you're trying to fit companies into a thoughtful intellectual model that you've built on your own. And that's hard work, and that's not the fun stuff, and that doesn't make it into the papers either.
And it's also when, as you're highlighting, where the emotions can get in the way. And some of these best practices are some of the things to be able to do the head checking the heart that we have talked about on a recurring basis.
Let me give you one more. Let me just give you one more. For those that are listening, let me just give you one more tactic that entrepreneurs use. I don't know if they use, let's assume they use it subconsciously and give them the benefit of the doubt. If you get one of these, hey, we're closing around and I can fit you in, but we're closing it next week, right? Hey, I got a slot for X 100,000. You want in? Because I got 4 more guys, I'd love to put you in at this round because the valuation is going to be right. By the next round, it's not going to give you the. Whenever you hear what that tactic is called urgency. It's the same tactic you see when you were growing up, for those who did this, and you were watching TV at 12 o'clock at night and someone said, buy the knives buy it now and you're going to get your money back. But in 6 hours from now, that deal's off the table. And that's why people are reaching for their credit cards. Urgency. It hits the different part of your brain. It moves from the future front side to the back end, the amygdala. And when you hear that and you get that, I'd love to take you in, but I got 4 guys waiting and I have one more slot and I got closed around because I'm about to meet with, Kleiner Perkins. When you hear stuff like that, right away, you got to have that spidey sense go easy. I'll miss around. Don't allow yourself to buy the urgency. And they don't do it on purpose, let's assume. But don't buy it because that leads to rash emotional decisions. And when you get one right, that's even worse. Because when you get one right, it creates a misperception, a bias that you know how to do this stuff, right? Like growing up, they tell me like, if you hit a shot with bad form, it's worse. My coach would say, rather you miss the shots with bad form because then you go back after the game and work on your form. Everyone hits a shot with bad form, but nobody becomes a champion with bad form. And if you're going to be in this business, you got to make sure your form is strong and you'll miss deals. Better miss deals and stay strong than to catch a couple and be making emotional last minute urgency. I'll bet. Stay away from that stuff.
Yeah, no, you're talking about with serial entrepreneurs where if they succeed in the first venture, that causes problems for them. This is the equivalent that you're highlighting within the investor realm. And Andrew, Moshe, both of them talked a bit during the panel about even when they succeeded early on, they now appreciate that it was despite what they were doing and how to be able to get past that. This is the investor overconfidence that can be a peril, just like the founder overconfidence that can be a peril. One of the things that you're raising, though, is an interesting thing about the amount of time. A couple of the panelists, Moshe and Andrew in particular, when it comes to taking longer to make decisions, they actually saw that as a minus. So it's a very interesting thing that you're raising to push back on that part of it. Moshe had talked about if it's taking too long, I'm out. That there's something that, if I can't decide within X amount of time on this, then he's saying it as a red flag. And Andrew built on it. If it takes you too long to get comfortable, that's sometimes your gut telling you that there's something, that there's a problem there. And so there's a balance in terms of the issue that you're raising, of being able to get that feel for, and this also might be back to your point about the different situations. This might be the different guts that are competing. There might be a gut that's too inclined to leap, and that one has to put in a little bit more of the disconfirming evidence, the pre-mortems, the practices that you were highlighting in terms of the being able to see their language and the urgency that they're trying to spark. Is that going to be a peril for me? But there's also people where the gut is in a different direction, where the inclination is going to be much more in the nose, and I have to get myself to see the positives, where any link in the chain is gone. But actually, maybe I can help them rebuild that link to be stronger, and other ways in which they might have to check it. And so that might be just one way that we can see being able to apply your guidance and the Moshe and Andrew guidance to the different people that we're talking about in the investor set.
Maybe I can sort of make it even clearer, which is the slower you think in the moment, the easier it is for your gut to speak. I'm all for it. I agree. Because the gut really is just your brain recognizing patterns, right? And there's a difference between emotions and gut, at least the way we're using the word gut, right? The way, if you really want to split the hair, emotions actually overwhelm and override pattern recognition. Because pattern recognition is a intellectual feeling, even that may sound like an oxymoron. It's you've seen something. You kind of can't put your finger on it, but something feels off. That means what's happening is your brain has seen a pattern, and now it's trying to round out the picture, but it can't because there's missing pieces. That's an intellectual perspective, schema way of seeing the world, right? The gut is not emotional. It's the mind saying, I've seen this 10 times. This doesn't fit fully, fit fully. Because our brain wants to close loops. Our brain wants to know the end of the story. Our brain wants to fit. Our brain wants closure. And when something doesn't have closure, it feels off to us. But that's a thinking problem. The thing I spent earlier is an emotional, an urgency. I want to get in a deal. I want to be rich. I want to be in. I don't want to lose. I don't want to fail. I don't want to regret. So what you brought up is exactly right. And I think that's really where the greatness lies, is knowing when you're in the world of emotions, in the world of poker, from what I was taught, is called tilt. Those who play poker, you're telling me if I was right. Poker players are constantly making pattern recognition decisions, thousands and thousands on every hand. But there's like an emotional moment where they feel like they're going to win the hand. And expert poker players, as I was told, they train themselves to know when that emotional, oh my God, I'm going to win. Because then the second they feel that way, they stop believing their decisions, because now they're being overrun by an emotionalness. And so they can't trust their gut anymore because they can't tell if it's gut or emotions. Which is why when you look at poker players, they all seem so stoic, because they're trying to flow that pattern recognition in. So I agree. When you're looking at something and it just doesn't feel right, and you're calm, and there's no like, I need the money by the end of the week, and you're just and you look at it again and look at it again, look at it again, look at it again. That's actually, I think, the emotions are trying to get in and say, buy me, and your brain is going, eh. So that's, to me, I think that's really where the greatness lies. It's not necessarily in your ability to figure out how to make an Excel spreadsheet. It's the ability to understand when you're in the world of emotions and when you're in the world of pattern recognitions, and then the discipline to just continuously learn and learn and learn and learn and learn, so that over the course of your VC career or investment career, or even if you're a lawyer and you're making investments, over the course of your life as an investor, you are developing a real ability to see opportunities that make sense for you personally, right? And there's someone else that could say, I love these types of companies, they're broken, but I like fixing them, or I have expertise in them and I can add, or I love companies that are very asset intensive because I have a lot of money, right? Everyone has their own niche within the niche.
Okay, no, we had Andrew talking about blackjack. You've now complemented that with your poker analogy. We started off this episode with the sports metaphor, and now we've moved into what some people also consider a sport, the card playing part of it, and wrapped around to it. Teeing up for our next segment, the last of the ones that we're going to do on the panel, we're going to be talking about building a portfolio and some of the divergences between investors who have a portfolio, lots of eggs in the basket, versus the founder who has a single egg in the basket, and how that leads to several divergences and challenges. And then also a question from the audience that we had there about the current investing climate. And that's where we're going to close with the third of these segments.
Okay, looking forward to seeing you next time. Of course, any questions, foundersdilemmaspodcast@gmail.com, and we'll see you next time.